Good afternoon, everyone. The organizers would like to welcome you and thank you all for joining us today. In a few minutes, we will start the session. But before we begin, we would like to invite you to watch the WSIS Forum 2022 video that will be played by the WIS team while we wait on other participants to register and to join us for today's session. Thank you for that video. Now, good afternoon once again, and thank you all for joining us for this workshop on multi-stakeholder collaboration for responsible and ethical artificial intelligence at the 2022 World Summit on the Information Society Forum. I'm Charlotte Moretz. I'm a senior policy analyst with the Universal Rights Group, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Now, for the smooth running of the session, we would like to give you some guidelines, some ground rules of how we will proceed during this event. Now, please note that during the session, attendees' microphones will all be muted. If you would like to intervene at the end during the Q&A, which we highly recommend, and we really want to see a lot of engagement, then please raise your hand. For those unfamiliar with the Zoom platform, the raise your hand function is located at the bottom of the participants window. And once you're given the floor, the moderator will unmute your microphone so you can really intervene live, ask questions, give comments on what has been said, etc. Now, once done intervening, then please mute your microphone again so that we don't really have background noise and that we can clearly hear other people speaking. We will take questions through the Q&A and the Zoom chat, and you can access those by clicking on the relevant buttons at the bottom bar of the Zoom interface. Now, the meeting will also be recorded and will be available on the event page of the WSIS Forum 2022 website soon after the end of the virtual workshop session. Now, we will start today's event with opening remarks from Lourdes Montenegro, Digital Security Transformation Lead at the World Benchmarking Alliance. She will be sharing with us key insight from the WBA's Digital Inclusion Benchmark, a publication that assesses the contribution of 150 of the world's most influential digital technology companies in relation to 4 measurement areas, namely access, skills, use, and innovation. After these opening remarks, we will turn to our esteemed panelists for their views on multi-stakeholder collaboration in the AI space. What is happening now and how can that multi-stakeholder collaboration be further strengthened to ensure ethical and a human rights-based approach to AI design, development, and deployment. As such, it's my pleasure to introduce Vincent Kaufman, CEO of Ethos Foundation, Ms. Celestia O'Neill, research analyst at EthicsGrade, and Mr. Imada Toshikazu, Senior Manager at the AI Ethics Office of the Sony Group Corporation. Welcome to all of you. Really looking forward to our upcoming debate. But first, let us turn to Lourdes for the introduction and for a short briefing on the DIV. Lourdes, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm really very happy to be here. The World Benchmarking Alliance has been active participant in the World Summit for the Information Society since 2019. And we find that the World Summit for the Information Society Forum is really a very good venue to gather multi-stakeholders, which is the reason why we're together here today. And the World Benchmarking Alliance is really, we are a global initiative and our mission is broader than the digital sector, but then the digital sector we find is very important towards achieving that mission, which is to make sure that the corporate sector, that the private sector contributes more to sustainable development goals and to achieving the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we find that digital technologies are indeed the cross-cutting enablers towards doing so. But for that to happen, we need to be able to have a digital transformation, a digitalization process that is truly inclusive, leaving no one behind, benefiting all people from all walks of life, and also a digital transformation process that is trustworthy, that mitigates risks and harms to individuals and to society. And to do that as an organization, we try to encourage a race to the top by publishing free and publicly available ranking and scores of corporations, of companies, of 200 of the world's most influential digital technology companies on their performance on digital inclusion across four broad areas. First, access, ensuring there's universal access to digital technologies for all people and especially vulnerable groups and marginalized communities, ensuring that companies are helping improve all levels of digital skills and especially school connectivity, ensuring that we can have trustworthy use, that privacy rights are respected, cybersecurity is maintained, and children's digital rights in particular are protected online. And finally, on innovation, we look at how companies are making sure that innovation is happening in an open, inclusive, and ethical way by contributing to the building of open standards and open source platforms, making sure that they are supporting technology innovation ecosystems, especially in developing countries and among vulnerable groups, and ensuring that the research and development process is inclusive, listens to the voices from diverse communities, and especially with women involved in technical development. And finally, the reason why we're here today is also to make sure that the deployment and development and use of artificial intelligence is done in an ethical way. And we have been publishing these benchmarks since 2020. So we had the second benchmark last year, and we're now on our way to the third benchmark coming out in 2023. And what we found, one of the standout findings from these 2 years of benchmarking work is that there's an alarming trend on the lack of progress on ethical AI. So, I mean, to perhaps underline that alarming trend, we found only 20 of the 200 of the world's most influential digital technology companies have any publicly disclosed commitment to ethical AI. And what that means is that there is still a long way to go for the industry to really pay attention to this issue and consider it something that is important in their operations. So 20 is a very small number, and we are hoping to see in the next few years that this tribe of companies grow, that there is more attention from digital technology companies paid to ethical considerations when they are developing and profiting from artificial intelligence. So that's why we're here today. It's really to bring life to that finding, because data is only data unless we act on it. So we would like to come up with solutions and perhaps actions from different multi-stakeholders. How can we collaborate together to ensure that there will be increased attention on ethical AI? And this is, this underpins our future as a global society, sustainability of our future. AI will have a big impact in the coming years, and is having a big impact now. And we are seeing a lot of the risks from the political polarization that is happening to the issues around fairness and discrimination, especially for people of color and for women. But somewhere along the road, we face large issues of labor displacement from automation, and what that means for developing countries in terms of their ability to industrialize and benefit from their competitive advantages in cheap labor manufacturing. So there are very many issues and concerns, and it's very important that we work together. SDG 17 remain our guiding North Star in the conversation. So I'll keep it short that way, and hope to hear from our different panelists, which we are so happy to have here with us today, a truly multi-stakeholder representation, from investors to the companies themselves, to business consulting and civil society. And we definitely want to come together and see what we can do to improve on this issue. So I'll keep that short and keep it there, and over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Lourdes, for that short but really illuminating presentation on the DIB. It really provides us with a lot of food for thought throughout the discussion. You also underlined really the importance and the timeliness of this discussion here. And when going through the report myself, indeed, I was also struck by the really small number of companies that have this and ethical AI guidelines that are publicly available. I mean, if you look at how ubiquitous AI has already become within industries, then to see that only 20 have one was a bit shocking. But I think we can be really pleased to then have a representative of Sony here who does have such guidelines. So really also looking forward to hear more from them. Now I have the pleasure to turn to our first panelist of today, Vincent Kaufmann, CEO of Ethos Foundation. Now, Vincent, what are your comments on the digital inclusion benchmark findings on ethical innovation? What struck you when going through the results?
So hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So first of all, unfortunately, I was not surprised. We came to the same conclusion. We made a similar study in Switzerland, not covering only tech companies, but also banks, insurance, pharma, because we believe this ethical AI principle also applies to other business. We don't have much tech. We not have the Silicon Valley here in Switzerland, but we actually came with very similar results, with very large corporations using AI, but only 3 out of 48 companies that we studied, we researched, had such ethical principle on AI. We conducted a survey with ethics grade. Celestia will certainly comment further on it. So I think we are really at the beginning of a very important process. I think now investors and shareholders are looking at this question. If we go back to the tech company, it's a huge part of investors' portfolios nowadays. those investors are under pressure. They have a fiduciary duties to integrate those ESG principles. They are quite under pressure certainly with climate. I think this is a priority. So maybe they leave a little bit this question of ethical AI. We are at the beginning of research on it, on making some principles. We at ASOS publish some shareholders' expectation on a more broad topics like corporate digital responsibility, which includes ethical AI, but not only. It's also about fair transition, environmental impact. So there is many issues around digitalization. So I think shareholders are now taking this seriously. We have also founded a group of investors, the Investor for Sustainable Digital Economy, ISDE, where there is Baillie Gifford, Church of England, which are also pushing on the direction of more transparency, working also on a report on tech addiction, which is a big issue in our view. I think we come close to a question of gambling or so on for shareholders. Excluding gambling, for instance, is something quite common. Now, why should we not extend this on unethical business models such as tech addiction or freemium gaming, which really create addiction around our children? So again, beginning of the process. I'm not surprised by the study, disappointed of course, but not really surprised. But I have hope that we will see an improvement in the future as investor and civil society are taking maybe more consciousness of the problems here.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for sharing those thoughts. I mean, really interested to hear maybe more about also your findings, because I think you raised a really important point that AI is not used only by tech companies. If you also look at biotech, I mean, okay, tech is in the word, but if you look at pharma, how they're using AI and the impact that could have on individual human rights, it's huge. And there, Switzerland, of course, I mean, is a world leader if you look at the pharma companies based there. So I would be very much interested to learn more about that. But let's keep that for the Q&A session later. And let's now move to our next speaker, next panelist of today, Celestia O'Neill. I would also like to hear more about your views on the findings of the DIB on ethical innovation. What are for you some of the key takeaways of the report and insights that the DIB provides? And do you also spot some opportunities of maybe where is there some low-hanging fruit to really push those numbers up? We've heard that I mean, most of the companies score less than 0.5 less than 1 on a 2-point scale. So that's not really great. So also interested to hear your views on that.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. Yeah, the digital inclusion benchmark has been really important and really revealing report supporting a lot of the research that we found and our research with Ethos. And I think it's really key in encouraging the development of responsible innovation policies, especially highlighting the slow progress of companies in adopting AI ethics principles. As you mentioned, only 20 overall, and you said, and on the report it says about 4 companies in the last year implementing new policies regarding AI ethics, which is bizarre in comparison to in response to the EU AI regulation proposal, which came out earlier in 2021, we would have hoped to have seen greater progress. But I think it also really illustrates the growing role of AI ethics in achieving ESG targets more widely. ESG and AI ethics are fundamentally intertwined, and introducing AI across industries has had a tangible impact on companies' environmental performances, but also customers' trust in operations and internal employee sentiments. The complex impacts of digitalization and introducing AI requires ESG concepts to be updated. And I think this is a great opportunity, especially with benchmarking in particular, is a great method in encouraging such. We also have benchmarking services to aid companies in understanding their new digital ethics responsibilities and recognize and highlight risks of area risks for each company. This was really emphasized within the digital inclusion report, and greater action is required from companies to implement and publish AI ethics principles in order to fulfill ESG commitments. But I think this is an opportunity to really make a really great change within industry and highlight and safeguard people's rights, which is key.
Thank you very much for those views, underlining really how interconnected AI is with the different elements from ESG. I think just to hark back to a point that also Vincent made, is that I have the feeling sometimes that the E is disproportionate large currently when we look at it, and when people are approaching it, be it the companies themselves or investors. So it's really also, I think, up to other stakeholders, especially also in the human rights space, to push a bit more for a better focus on the different elements, and including also on how AI then interacts to that, what impact it does have, also not only on the E, but also on the S and the G. So thank you very much for bringing that into the discussion, Celestia. Now it's my pleasure to turn to an industry representative, Toshikazu. So what are you at Sony doing to ensure that your innovations approach artificial intelligence in an ethical and responsible way?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. I think we recognize the importance of AI very early. I mean, we were probably one of the early adapters of AI in the industry. So for example, back in 2017, when the PAI, which is the international NPO who is taking initiative for ethical AI, the partnership on AI, that launched, we quickly recognized the importance of the initiatives and decided to join. So we were one of the first founding members, and then became the rather central core member of the community. And then in 2018, we published the corporate standards, Sony Group AI guidelines. Then we installed the AI committee back in 2019, which consists of senior management to make sure that AI is properly observed and developed within the Sony Group. Across the group. And we have also been an active member of society in terms of the government body or boards and economy bureaus, trying to push AI in society and industry, not just within Sony. So for AI at Sony, the goal is to ensure that we continue to expand our businesses using AI. We do so in an ethical way. So, and I want to emphasize this point, since people sometimes have the misconception that the AI is about stopping or slowing the development of and the deployment of AI, but it is opposite. So although in the short term, there might be some additional time and resources needed to build more ethical AI, but the goal is to enable long-term sustainable growth of our businesses leveraging AI. So we have seen examples across the industry where businesses have been stopped by the regulators due to the AI problems or incidents. Through our AI work at Sony Group, we want to ensure that addressing AI concerns early, so that our businesses can thrive and benefit society. So with that, as a dedicated office in Sony, the AI ethics office is designed to be a central body for providing subject matter expertise on AI ethics to all of the Sony Group. So in the short term, our goal is increase awareness across Sony Group of AI ethics and to improve further ethical practices of our business incorporating AI. So we launched our AI assessment process as a part of the quality management system for our electronics products in 2021. In addition, we are working with the stakeholder across Sony Group to provide advice and addressing their AI challenges. Through this assessment, we look forward to developing more guidance, training, and tools to help business units and other internal organizations diagnose and mitigate AI issues. These are the overview of our approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toshikazu, for bringing in this practical experience and also for providing us with a sneak peek into how companies are dealing with these complex but very important issues. It's really good to hear that Sony really also plays this this issue up to really senior management level. I think that's very important to make sure that as a company as a whole, you are attentive to that you involve senior management. Otherwise, often it does not really go far. So that's really great to hear. And then just to underline, indeed, ethical approaches to AI are not about stopping the use, but making it sustainable, making sure that it benefits everyone in the long term, and then to look beyond short-term gains. So I think that's also really an important element to underline. So thank you for bringing that into the discussion. Now we will turn back to our first panelist again for another question to Vincent. So we just heard from Toshikazu how companies might approach ethical AI, what they're doing regarding guidelines, etc. But what actions can investors take to ensure a responsible use of AI and a responsible digital innovations?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think investor, when it comes to having an impact on companies, have two ways: engaging or sometimes divesting when we're not happy. So of course we prefer the first way, engaging a dialogue with companies, and of course having some clear expectation. So I think there's still some work to do on the investor side. Again, it was the same as in 2005 when the Carbon Disclosure Project was launched. It was to create a framework of expectation, of similar expectation, and still companies are still complaining there is too much expectation and framework. So I think we have to really build common expectation and then be clear and gather and join force among investors via collaboration, such as the PRI, which are great tools to share our expectation and start building up some benchmark as a World Alliance benchmark is doing, because this is great tools for us to push best practices. And of course, having some good example of companies. So looking at what Sony did, I think is great, because then we always good to go to your peers, to the competition, and say, look, Sony has done this. We can start to build up on best practices. So I think identifying best practices, pushing those best practices toward the market, and engaging this dialogue. And then, of course, there is at one point shareholders have to decide. And I think this is a question I have also for Toshikazu, whether we can handle some critical issue when a company builds its business model on addiction, typically on gaming, on the gaming industry, on gambling industry. AI could really have negative impact on society, and those companies are listed on the market. And of course, pushing some ethical principle, I think is like asking Philip Morris to do something else as cigarettes. So do we face with some of those companies which really build their business models on addiction, on tech addiction? Again, for the kids, I have kids and I see how quickly it can go. I'm wondering whether we can push best practices there, or as investor, we might say, okay, this is unethical. We have to divest and not give capital to those kind of business model. So it's again a little bit the same question on the oil industry. Can we transform an industry which is very reliant on unethical practices, or can we make it a little bit more ethical? And so I think their investor have to decide up to where they want to push engagement, pushing best practices, engaging companies towards good practices, or at the end of the day saying this is the kind of business we don't want to allocate capital. But again, joining force is the first things to do. creating benchmark best practices, identifying those best practices, and pushing those best practices. This is always working well.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for those thoughts, and then really kind of very practical points. I would also be interested later on to kind of hear from Toshikazu what his view is on that, especially on the peer learning. What room is there to really to do that, and then to also push peers towards really the good practices that Sony now has established. But first, let's go back to Celestia. So just for you also to maybe highlight a type of stakeholder that we haven't really well talked about yet, namely civil society. But what actions can civil society organizations or even individuals take to ensure that companies develop responsible approaches to AI that respect individuals' human rights? What has already been done maybe in this field, and what can we learn from existing actions and campaigns, be it really regarding this space or maybe other areas where we can copy and learn from, similar to what maybe investors can learn from the entire work that has been done regarding decarbonization, etc. I mean, is there something similar that civil society actors can learn from previous campaigns and to apply it here to this issue? Celestia.
Thank you. I think we've already seen changes in consumer behavior towards more ethically centered purchasing decisions, whether that be where the eggs we buy in our supermarket are from, or whether or not companies are really taking care of employees, regarding smart factories and automation of manufacturing or delivery services. I think it's been a large issue which has been brought up in the US media at the moment with the existence and the start of unionization. I think it's a really good example. In our role as an advocacy group, Ethics Grade aims to ensure responsible AI that respects people's rights through empowering stakeholders to mobilize their priorities and align their values to capital. We recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all approach regarding ESG and ethics. We all have completely different priorities, and rightfully so. And it's important for stakeholders to understand the companies that they work for and work with through a lens which reflects corporate values, objectives, and priorities, make sure that those risks are being taken into consideration once you become a stakeholder with them or going forward. What some of our work as advocacy group was working with Ethos Fund, and so we were working with their expectations, mobilizing that to be able to research companies in the Swiss market, which was a really great cause and project, which I think really helped. We find that pushing a personalized ESG lens, mobilizing sustainable and ethics-led financial investment. I think this is key, and emphasizing finance's focus on respecting and safeguarding people's rights, but also contributing to a more sustainable financial system and hopefully improving outcomes for employees, but also civil society.
Thank you very much, Celestia, for those additional thoughts, and I'm sure we'll take that forward during the Q&A session. I will now be turning to Toshikazu for my final question of this panel discussion session. So I would like to remind all participants online that there is still time to share your comments and your questions. We've already received a couple. But yeah, please, if you have any more questions, then please let them, just share them via the chat and the Q&A function. Now, Toshikazu, for the final question, how can other stakeholders actually support tech companies to ensure responsible use of AI? So are there any concrete examples that you could maybe provide of where companies like Sony would be really helped by other stakeholders?
Thank you. And I think this is a very good question. So that on top of that, it is important that the human-centered and the multi-stakeholder initiatives be carried out for ethical AI. And actually, ethics are influenced by cultural backgrounds such as values, country by country or regions by region. So consistency based on common definitions or understanding principles and concept among stakeholders is important. So for us, the goal is to enhance and expand human creativity and curiosity rather than replace it. So ethics manifested through harnessing diversity and earning trust through responsible business practices has long been a key part of our values. So basically, AI ethics is very hard. I mean, in order to identify and mitigate AI harms, you need to understand what AI systems is and how they could have unintended consequences and how they might be attacked or misused, or how they might harm people and how to prevent these harms. So it is challenging for developers, providers, and users to solve those problems in the long AI supply chain. So for achieving the goal, we need to accumulate more diverse use cases and insight or knowledge by using it, and learn how to improve the governance system process from perspective of validity, sufficiency, and efficiency. Like Vincent says, starting building best practices and expand it to industry. So cooperation of each stakeholders is indispensable to achieve it. Also, increasing awareness and promoting education concerning AI ethics among stakeholders are grounds and other keys for achieving the goal. Like Celestia said, maybe purchaser, user company or consumer may consider what that AI provides as value when you purchase or invest in certain AI systems, like ESG, SDGs, conscious purchasing behavior, maybe another key. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toshikazu, for that input. And now that brings us to the close of this first section of the panel discussion. I now have the pleasure to open the floor for the Q&A segment. So there's still time to raise your hand. If you would like to take the floor, please raise your hand so that we can unmute you and give you the floor. But in the meantime, we've also received some questions. So I'll just read them out one by one, and then I will invite all panelists, also Lourdes, to comment on those after I've read them out, and I will just use the same order as we had at the start of the session. So the first question is, how could the different stakeholders address the latent trust deficit around AI? So we've seen, I think, really more and more maybe negative perception in the public at large when it comes to AI. So this is definitely also a signal of just a lack of trust, both in the application itself, but also how companies use it. So what can different stakeholders do to address that issue? Then another question is on how could we secure progress towards the use of AI without bias? Again, quite a lot of apprehension maybe that exists, again, with the public at large, and for some good reason, is regarding just bias that is baked into AI systems, either because they are training on data that is biased itself, or because it's being developed by people that are not per se a super diverse group. I think that also really came to light when you look at just the small amount of women involved in AI R&D, which can also point to then some bias that might come into the design process. So it's not only about training on biased databases itself, but also even the design where bias might slip in. So I think that's really also a very topical, very crucial question. And then maybe just a couple of other questions. I think specifically then for Lourdes, as you mentioned, this is actually the second GIB. The first one was based in 2020. Are there some interesting trends? I know you've expanded it quite a lot. You've looked now at 150 companies instead of 100, but kind of, are there some differences that you're already noticing between the two? Are there some trends, some negative, positive? Also maybe regarding the impact of COVID, is there some points there, some insights, some key takeaways? So I also wanted to put that forward. So maybe let's go back to the panelists, and then let's see if there are any additional questions that have come in the meantime, and then we can put those forward again. But Lourdes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's really good to put the findings on ethical AI in the broader context of the digital inclusion performance of the digital technology sector. It is true that what is a tech company is actually expanding. So the definition, what is a tech company, is growing. But there are existing companies who are very embedded in the ecosystem and who need to show leadership. And these are the 200 companies which we've identified as keystone. And what we found, and this is still the prevailing trend, is that very few of these companies have actually embraced their responsibility towards an inclusive and trustworthy digital transformation. So what that means is that there are still very few companies who from the top, from the board level, from CEO level, consider inclusion and trust in the digital system to be important to the sustainability of their business and their business operations. So that's where the industry still is very early. It's like a car industry where there's still no seat belts. And we're still in the process of making sure that there are seat belts, that there are protections when the crash inevitably occurs. So for example, we only have 27 companies who get a passing grade on the digital inclusion benchmark out of the 150 companies. So that's the overall picture. And therefore the picture on ethical AI is not that surprising. We found one additional company who, since from the first benchmark to the second benchmark, published their ethical AI principles. And we consider that good news. We're seeing a lot more attention for gender diversity, especially in East Asia. So East Asian companies are now looking at women in the technical workforce and improving the number of women that are represented in their R&D teams. That's really very good news. And there are some things that we can be happy about, but the ethical AI lack of commitment and progress is still a big issue. And it's just the beginning. We're not even asking companies for the governance processes around ethical AI or what are the contents of the principles that they follow. It's just a very low threshold where a company commits to consider the ramifications of this particular technology. And that's where we are. So we have our work cut out for us.
Thank you, Lourdes. Okay, I will now turn to the other panelists. Just a reminder of the questions. How could the different stakeholders address the latent trust deficit around AI? And then how could we secure progress towards the use of AI without bias? Vincent, the floor is yours.
Difficult questions on the I think on the second one, on the bias AI, that's clear that the expectation goes towards the data collection that the companies has to ensure that the process of data collection behind the AI are broad enough. They have to test regularly the data. There is some best practices. There is some toolkits existing on ethical AI development more and more. So I think there is a way to test the data set behind the codes to ensure maximum neutrality in the data set. But however, if the finality is autonomous weapon at the end of the day, I think, of course, there is other ethical issues. But so there is way. It's just a question of willingness of the companies to test the thing and ensure that the data set are big enough and without bias. I think this is key. But I'm not the expert on this, so should better ask developers and there. But again, there is emerging best practices. I think Celestia can comment also, because on the benchmarks they have a couple of questions how to ensure those data are robust enough. And yeah, the deficient trust around AI. Again, it's I think AI should be really developed for positive impact on the environment, on the society. There is many good and positive use of AI. We have to focus on this. And I think not accepting development of AI which have not a clear, demonstrable positive impact, because otherwise we can sustain unethical business practices, surveillance, or unethical purposes. So or making more money. So I think AI for positive impact, and otherwise it will be difficult to create this trust.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for those responses, and indeed very complex questions, but still good to hear your thoughts on that. Celestia, over to you. I mean, same questions. Don't feel obliged to respond to all of them, but I mean, of course, very welcome to share your thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I'm particularly interested in the question regarding latent trust deficiencies around AI, because I think that it's becoming an increasing issue as we see examples again in the media regarding virtual assistants technology responding with quite dangerous suggestions to children. And we're seeing more vulnerable communities and members of society interact with technologies which don't take their needs into consideration. I think that part of our work has been focusing on supporting companies and providing them the opportunity to engage in transparency and accountability practices. I'm inviting them to contribute to our benchmarking practices to gain inside view insights. I think by using the AI ethics pillars such as transparency and accountability to review and test what companies are committed to, I think that's a really great way of pushing forward the public commitments regarding AI ethics, and therefore addressing the trust deficit, which is definitely growing.
Thank you very much, Celestia, for bringing that in. Then Toshikazu, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say we should consider AI ethics by design, involving the research of AI technologies. When the early phase of R&D, so it may be difficult to identify the actual AI ethics issues or incidents, because use case cannot be identified at such early phases. But yeah, you may think about the invention of gunpowder. You don't know how the inventor of the gunpowder didn't think about the such a use case for use that kind of technologies. So and the bias hidden in everyone's brain, so even it's unconscious. So the increasing awareness and education for such a researcher is one of the key and very important and fundamental of all other activities afterwards.
Thank you very much for that input, Toshikazu, and I completely agree. Education is really education and training is really key. I mean, we can't per se expect from very technical people that they know or are aware about all the human rights standards, for example, that a company should respect and that the products that they make should respect. And so it is important to provide training, be it on human rights, be it on recognition of bias, etc., on inclusivity. So a very good point raised there. Now we are coming to the end of this panel. It's been really interesting, really a lot of kind of food for thought to take away from this session. But before we end, I would like to give the opportunity to all of the speakers just for some final remarks, some final comments, and maybe if you could also address the role of benchmarks, kind of how can benchmarks as one developed by WBA actually help to drive corporate responsibility, but also really drive corporations to take up this issue and to ensure that they adopt guidelines that are transparent about their use of AI, etc. So really interested to hear from you about that and your final remarks. Lourdes, over to you.
I think I'll make it really short. We've talked about how different stakeholders can do something about this problem. So I would throw out a call to action. So the World Benchmarking Alliance is building up a collective impact coalition that will focus on driving more ethical AI commitments from the private sector, and especially from the 200 of the world's largest digital technology companies. So let us know, feel free to message us, reach out to us if you want to join in this global coalition. It's truly multi-stakeholder, from civil society to investor representation. So that's the challenge that I throw out to the audience. Join us, and we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lourdes, for those comments. Vincent, over to you.
For investors, it's a gold standard to have benchmark. We love benchmark just to compare our performance against a reference benchmark. We live with benchmark, so comparing companies and making those kind of things is very useful for investors and also for companies. And in our engagement, we really can again compare companies and then go to the management, go to the board, and say, look at your neighbors. It's more transparent, as improved, as ethical AI. We've done it with Novartis, as published typically is the first AI principle. And then we can go to the neighbor next road in Basel, go to Roche and say, look, your competitors is doing so, and usually it always has impact. So we love definitely benchmark, and I think it helps really improving transparency and best practices among companies.
Thank you very much for underlining that very important point again. Celestia.
Thank you again. Yeah, I agree. I think this is an opportunity for companies and organizations to become a front runner. I think, as the benchmark's shown, in the last year, but there's an amazing opportunity to really embrace all the education, amazing initiatives such as the World Summit of Information Societies, to safeguard your company's reputation, but also stakeholders and consumers, by really emphasizing ethical AI and digital responsibility.
Thank you very much. Toshikazu.
Yeah, thank you again. So like I said, purpose of our AI activity is to provide added value for our group's AI-related businesses and increasing the reliability value of our products, and also brand improvement, and also reduction of the AI-related risks. So if benchmark supports those the values of those activities that may further motivate and accelerate such responsible ethical AI initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those final remarks. So thank you to all for those statements. It was really great privilege for me to moderate this interesting and very timely workshop. There were so many elements that came in, so I can't really repeat everything, but I just wanted to maybe highlight a couple of key takeaways that stood out for me. Firstly, there's definitely room for improvement in this field. As mentioned a couple of times, only 20 companies have public AI guidelines, and even fewer mention human rights in their guidelines. But we're also seeing some positive signs of improvement in this field, as an increased number of women in R&D. One more company that published their guidelines between the 2020 and the 2021 benchmark. So there are some positive signals as well. Then another point was that we can really learn from past practices in different fields. For example, the work done regarding decarbonization of investor portfolios. Maybe we can replicate that for this space. Also campaigns to sensitize consumers so that they take this issue into account when choosing the companies they buy services and products from. Then we can also learn from each other. We can learn from different stakeholders, but we can also learn from our peers. And especially tech companies could learn from the best practices of other peers, really become front runners in this field, which of course helps to maintain a good reputation and to build a customer base. And then finally, this is not only an issue for technology companies, but really for the private sector at large, as AI has become ubiquitous in business practices across sectors. So thank you all once more for joining us today. Thank you to all the panelists. Also a big thank you to the World Benchmarking Alliance for bringing us all together. And before we officially close the session, we would like to invite you we would like to invite the WSIS team to play the WSIS Forum 2022 Partners video. Enjoy the video and have a great rest of the day to everyone. Thank you.